Okay, welcome to everybody here in attendance. There are still a few people joining in, but we have the vast majority of our panel. We're still hoping to receive Jeffrey Otim, our colleague from ISSD Uganda. But frankly, I think many colleagues in Uganda are having, unfortunately, some problems with internet. So I'm not quite sure if Jeffrey will be able to make it. In any case, you're all very welcome to this session on promoting and supporting sensible seed sector regulation. We have a few short presentations to kick us off, and we'll have a very open panel discussion afterwards. Maria, I don't know if you're with me as our session host. Here you are. Welcome. We will have this session up until just before 1 o'clock, at which point we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll move into our closing and synthesis session of the entire conference. I am going to shortly post a link in the chat. So while you're listening to the discussions here, you might consider registering for the General Assembly, the first General Assembly of the African Seed and Biotechnology Partnership Platform. I will share that link. It's a separate event on a separate system. So if you are interested to attend, please see that in the chat. In any case, let's head forward with our discussion. Maria, welcome again. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, James, and welcome to everybody joining this session on promoting and supporting sensible seed regulation. As we have seen over the past days in this conference, and as we all know, seed sectors in Africa are very diverse, and that means that when you strengthen them, a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. So what does that mean specifically for seed sector regulation? How can we support a more dynamic and adaptive regulatory approaches that support the diversity in crop stakeholders and seed systems present in Africa? And how can we align seed sector regulation with realities on the ground, but also align them with seed sector ambitions at national level? And that is what this session is about. When you talk about this topic, you may talk about different regulatory areas, but for this session, we said, let's zoom in on specifically on seed quality assurance. And we have an excellent panel and we have excellent speakers to do so. So today here with us are Dr. David Spielman, who is a senior research fellow and program leader at IFPRI. We have Dr. Lava Kumar from IATA, who is the head of the germplasm unit and is a virologist at IATA. We have Dr. Margaret McEwen, who is a senior scientist at SIP. And we have Mainza Mungoya, who is a program coordinator at the African Seed Access Index. And hopefully we will also have soon with us Jeffrey Otim from the ISD Uganda program, where he is a seed systems and policy manager. But let me not waste any more time, and I would like to hand over to David for a short presentation to set the scene, after which we dive a bit more deep into 3 case studies, and we will have a panel discussion. I encourage you to put questions in the chat, but please don't be disappointed if we can't address them, because we have only 50 minutes for this session, whereas we may talk a whole day about it. So I hand over to David. Please, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, James, for introducing the panel. And thank you for my co-panelists for joining us today. And I apologize if I have any connectivity issues. I'm coming to you from Kigali, Rwanda, where we generally have excellent connectivity, but today is a little bit off. I'm not sure why. In any case, let me start by saying, I'm a trained economist. I think about regulation a lot. It's in our nature to think about regulation. As an economist, we look at regulation as a means of perfecting imperfect markets. That is, when a market doesn't work, when a buyer and a seller don't have the same information to work with, or don't know something about a product or a service, a good or a service in equal measure, then we use regulations to sort of bridge that gap. Seed systems and seed markets are exactly the same. We know that seed is a credence good. That is, you only learn about it by using it. And it's very hard to assess its quality, the quality of the seed, when you purchase it, right? Because you're just looking at an inanimate object and you don't know about its physical quality or its genetic potential, apart from what the seller tells you. So in a sense, we use regulations to make sure that there are properly labeled seed packages, or that the seed are somehow certified and have that stamp of certification, or some other indicator that bridges that inequality or asymmetry of information between seller and buyer. But regulations can only improve markets up to a point. And if you click, James, on the next slide, this is a graphical representation of my point. There you go. So think about how intensively we regulate markets, right? And how that affects sort of the size or the value of the market of interest. If we have no regulation, people may not trust what they're buying. Sellers may be discouraged from selling into a market where people are copying their goods or their services, so on and so forth. Markets with no regulation and no transparency and no information, or unequal information, tend to be generally very small and fragmented. At the other extreme, if you have a tightly regulated market, right? Those regulations can be a barrier to entry. They can prevent people from participating in the market, from producing seed and selling it, or from even buying seed and using it. So it's really important to think about sort of a sensible point between totally unregulated markets and totally highly regulated markets for seed. And I think, none of us come out at the same point on this. My fellow colleagues in the CG centers who are breeders, for instance, many of them, not all, but many, favor a strong regulatory regime because they don't want their good work in breeding to be contaminated, both literally and figuratively, by the actions of unscrupulous seed sellers on the market. They don't want their reputation put at stake by people who are cheating on the margins. On the other hand, there are lots of seed exchanges that are unregulated. What we do, over the fence post or between farmers, neighbor to neighbor, and quite simply, they may not need regulation in order to be functional, albeit at a low level. So next slide, if you will. So, the next point is, as Mario was saying, is that there's no one-size-fits-all solutions, only a range of possibilities. And that's really, I think, the key message that throughout this conference, this ISSD conference, we've been making, that you have to really think about regulation in terms of the context, the commodity, the crop, the agroecology, the market, and the population you're thinking about. Next slide. And to give you a sense of all of the sort of regulatory options, think about this in terms of this graph, in terms of the cost of regulation, right? Regulation is essentially a public expenditure. We rely on government to spend money to operate a regulatory system. And we do that especially in the case of many crops to ensure that the seed is not subject to pest and disease pressures, or other intervening factors that would reduce its yield or its effectiveness or what have you. There are different ways we can invest to address that problem. We can breed for host resistance. We can use extension systems to help farmers improve their management practices. We can inspect and certify seed domestically. We can import and inspect certified seed, or simply accept another country's certification regime. Or we can even just let the seed market run unregulated, and when we see a disease outbreak, we can quarantine and destroy affected crops. These are all regulatory options. Some are more extreme than others. Some work in combination with others. And that's really, I think, what you need to think about with respect to, not pursuing one-size-fits-all solutions. And my fellow panelists will talk more about this. And then next slide. The final point I simply want to make is that, we all are very confident about, the design of regulatory systems. Everybody says, well, you must certify at this level threshold of tolerance, or you must certify this percentage of all seed, or you must have a germination or purity rate at this percentage. But as most of us know in working on policy issues in Africa, the question is never really about design. We can import policy and regulatory designs from any number of countries and get them passed in parliament, or put into effect by the seed certification agency or whoever is on the hot seat. The question is the implementation. Credible implementation of a regulatory regime is what makes the approach work or not work. And I think that is a question most of us think about, with all the rules, with all the regulatory systems we have in place, can we expect, and do we want credible implementation? So those are just some sort of scene setting ideas to think about from my side. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to the remainder of the panel and not take up their time, because I think they have great examples of where these issues come to play. And with that, I turn it over. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, David. That's excellent, an excellent setting the scene. And I think we can now move to the first case study, which goes more deeply into one topic. So I would like to hand over to Jeffrey Otim of ISD Uganda. But Jeffrey, I would like urge you to really be concise. I want to give you 4 minutes to present your case or the key issues of your case, because again, we could talk one day about one case specifically, but try to be short and concise. Over to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Maya. I'm very privileged to share with you the experience of one of the sensible regulations in Uganda, and that is the quality declared seed regulations. Regulations are helpful when they address a particular issues. And in this case, Uganda realized that farmers were not accessing quality seed of self-pollinated crops, and there were no regulatory tools to support the production and marketing of this particular segment of crops. And therefore, in 2020, Uganda came up with the seed and plant regulations. And as a result, there is increased production of quality seed for self-pollinated crops, which has low profit margins and could not compete with the commercial companies. And this has also created decentralization of quality assurance system that provide the infrastructure to help control, support, and coordinate the production of quality declared seed. And of course, as a result, this regulation has stimulated the demand for varieties, improved varieties, which comes from research. And these varieties were there in the shelves of research, and they cannot go into commercialization because of the low profit margin. So the regulation has really opened out the production of these crops, and therefore farmers can now access these improved varieties for better yields. Next slide, please. So how does the QDS regulations support the QDS system? In the QDS regulation, this is important that a farmer who produces QDS is registered with the authority. And this registration process are governed through the legal frameworks of the regulations. The farmer registers and registers the field crops. The regulators, which is government, does inspections of the fields. The seed, finally, when it is harvested, the seed are sampled and tested in the laboratory. And only those seed lots which are past the minimum quality standards are issued with a tamper-proof green label to certify that this is a quality declared seed available, ready for marketing. And then the seed is sold to the farmers within the community. First of all, this provide proximity because it is sold within the community, and also it is affordable because of the reduced stringent requirements in inspections and other certification processes. So this makes the whole QDS system more affordable and more accessible to farmers, increasing access to quality seed. Next slide, please. So these are some of just the indicators of the quality mark labels for the QDS products, which are clearly explained in the regulation. So in the regulation, you find the QDS product must have a tamper-proof green labels, which clearly indicate the different quality parameters of the seed stock. And also from the seed laboratory, it provides a different quality parameters which are tested, like germination, purity, and moisture content. Those are the most critical ones for the QDS. So all this summarizes sensible regulation that offers a direct support to improving the quality seed access. So, but what is needed for further improvement and sustainability of this QDS regulation in Uganda? Yes, the regulation is there, but it still needs to be implemented. It needs to be formally centralized. It needs to be formally put into practice at the different regional hubs to create and develop seed testing hubs to cut distance to the central testing laboratories. Supporting also the starter materials like the basic seed, the pre-booking system to complement the QDS system so that they are able to continuously produce the quality seed is still very important. And of course, promoting the uptake of this quality seed in the community so that the market pool, the market demand continue to drive the implementation of this QDS regulation is still very necessary. Next slide, please. So these are just briefly the highlights of how sensible regulation can transform seed access within a country, and we benefit so much in Uganda from this implementation. Thank you, Maya.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeffrey, for this nice and concise presentation. And let's move now to the other example, which is on light touch seed quality assurance in Nigeria. So I hand over to you, Lava. Also try to be concise and short.
Sure, thank you. Thank you. Okay, now I will provide another example of a case where how we are trying to adapt to the regulatory system for a crop that is trying to establish a formal seed system in Nigeria. David has set a very nice background to this session. He mentioned a number of important points. One of the point that stuck in is prominent is seed regulations, how seed regulations originated in many countries. It's basically adoption from other established systems. So it is not truly photocopying, but pretty much photocopying a regulatory system or a policy that has been well established working in one country to another country. And such systems, quite often, the risk of such approach is that the adopted policy has been tailored to another country where the seed system has evolved over a period of time and the policy has taken different adjustments over a period of time. But the country that has adopted this framework, it only functions provided the seed system is at the same level. But in most cases, seed system is nascent. So that is the major reason why we have so many challenges in Africa implementing seed regulations. We have the best regulations, but the system is not there. So it is like putting cart before the horse. Okay, we have a system, we have regulations which are fantastic, well designed, but the system is not working. So what is the need? There are a range of possibilities. Again, a statement David mentioned, how we can make things work. There are many possibilities. One of the possibilities that we are trying to work out here is accepting that the regulatory framework that is established in the country is actually beneficial to promote seed systems and also to promote seed entrepreneurs. But then there is a need for space for the seed system to evolve. So at this point, we need to consider that one size does not fit all, right? There are different crops, different technologies being used for seed production. Hybrids, for instance, is highly technical. And the good thing with hybrids is it can only be generated by the professional seed producers. It is not possible by the farmers or communities. Therefore, it is good for private sector. And there is an exclusive territory for it. So we don't have to worry about hybrid seeds being everywhere. But it's mainly the open pollinated varieties or vegetative propagated crops which are at risk. Taking yam as an example, yam has traditionally it's propagated through tubers and sets. And it has a well-established traditional seed system. It even have traditional seed yam markets, which is very unique. There is no seed yam, there is no seed markets for maize or cowpea or rice, but there are seed yam markets. So it shows the system is there, but it doesn't fit into the formal system. And then since the technologies that have emerged over the last 10 years has created a new opportunities for the private sector to come in, or including even for the traditional farmers to evolve, adopt and evolve into a professional seed entrepreneurs. So the need is to train the regulatory framework to fit into the both, to cater to the both systems. So next slide, please. So we had a number of challenges to deal with. As I mentioned, there is already an established framework for certification of yam, which is well intended. For instance, if you look at the minimum tolerable thresholds for pest and diseases in the seed lot is almost zero for almost all the endemic pests, including the common fungal diseases, which hardly cause any damage. The set zero. If we have to adopt this as is, we literally will end up rejecting every seed lot in the country. So therefore, it is impractical. So the first thing is to realize that the framework is not operational. So with that, we got a buy-in from the regulator that we need to take a flexible approach to evolve a system that eventually will grow into the regulatory framework. So we have come up with an alternative regulations to enable certification without compromising the quality. So we call it as light touch because light touch is the beginning stage and then to the medium touch and then the desired high level stringency. So the modified quality standards would enable seed certification by the local inspectors and also help seed entrepreneurs meet with these requirements. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is my last slide. So where did we brought the flexibility? The first stage is at the registration level. So the regulatory framework demands that every seed producer must have accredited by the Ministry of Commerce as a registered entrepreneur authorized to perform business in the country, which is the major bottleneck. So an exemption was given to register community producers or even emerging entrepreneurs without that registration, so that they can actually operate as a seed incubation business to test whether they would be able to do the business and also to learn how to operate seed yam business in the country. So that was a major wave here. So this has now provided room for community seed producers to formally register with the regulatory agency in the country to produce seed yams. The second is the flexible thresholds. So the stringent regulations that are there for certifying seed yams have been modified to enable by providing certain provisions that would help remove certification for the endemic pests, which don't spread through the seed tubers, so they don't pose any risk. And then the third aspect is introduction of third-party inspections. So these are basically appointing licensed seed inspectors locally who can monitor and perform quality assurance seed produced at the local communities. And they also help registering these seed entrepreneurs who may not be familiar with the regulatory system using the digital tools that have been recently introduced called Seed Tracker. Okay, so all this is now collectively helping CDM systems to establish and ultimately providing space to seed system to evolve and fit into the regulatory framework and help growth of the seed yam enterprise in Nigeria. So there is a similar model for cassava and also for other crops, but I just provide this as an example. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lava, for this very nice example from Nigeria, which you really explained in a very nice, concise way. And now I would like to go to the last example, which is from Margaret, which talks about regulatory space, and then specifically for vegetatively propagated crops in Kenya. So Margaret, please, the floor is yours. Try to be short and concise so that we have time for discussion also. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you to the other panelists. I want to present some of the thinking that has come out of a study that we did in Kenya, a collaboration between the CG Research Program for Rich Tubers and Bananas and Policies, Institutions and Markets. So next slide, please. So this is particularly around seed potato in Kenya. And even though everyone thinks maize is the most important crop, potato is also a very important crop in Kenya. And the demand for potato, both fresh and processed, remains unmet. And as we've seen in a lot of the examples over the last few days, the amount of certified seed is really low. It's around 4 to 5% of seed potato which is used in Kenya is certified. So the informal sector is critically unknown. But also what is unknown is the health status of seed potato in the informal sector. And we know that there is a yield gap between the use of recycled seed and quality seed. Next slide, please. So in our work in Kenya, as in many countries and with many crops, obviously there are many different stakeholders involved. And I just want to highlight here that obviously the ministry has a key role of oversight in Kenya. And then the regulatory body also has been delegated to KEFIS for the seed regulatory functions. We have both large-scale private seed companies for seed potato in Kenya, but also a very vibrant small and medium-scale seed production sector. And there are linkages between both the large-scale seed production and the small-scale seed production. In Kenya also, we have the devolution of powers to the county departments of agriculture, so they play a critical role. And donors are supporting both the commercial seed potato sector and the small-scale seed potato sector. And the national program, CAURO, and the CG also work across both sectors. So it's quite a complex group of stakeholders. And I think one of the points that we would like to emphasize is that really who sits at the table in the discussions around regulations and seed standards. Next slide, please. So what we saw in this study is that there are really multiple objectives. People at the county level are very focused on ensuring household food security and income security for the small scale farming sector, seed producers there. But then there are concerns at the national level to minimize the risk of plant diseases. And for seed potato in particular, there are critical diseases such as bacterial wilt and potato cyst nematode, which are not only seed-borne, but they're also soil-borne. So this makes it difficult to manage the disease risk. And then, as I've said before, we're working at different scales, both small scale and large scale, but also when we're looking at the seed laws and regulations, obviously international interests come in terms of the domestication of global regulations to national conditions. And so there's a playoff between these different levels. Next slide, please. So what comes out critically here, and I think it's across many of the crops that we're working with, that the informal and formal seed, and where, by that I mean the potato, the fresh potato for consumption, these systems are interlinked, because often small ware potato is either used or sold as seed potato. So if we ignore the informal seed systems, we're posing a risk to the whole potato system. But also formalizing the informal also can increase different types of risks. There's also an increasing discussion, as David highlighted, around integrated seed health approaches, which balances breeding for host resistance, strengthening farmer seed management practices, and the use of some certified seed coming through the system at regular intervals. The last thing I would like to highlight that's happening in Kenya is that there are consultative processes going on, and so that we shouldn't see regulations as monolithic. There can be discussions, change can happen. So for example, in Kenya, there are processes going on to develop separate regulations for vegetatively propagated crop seed, recognizing the different characteristics of that seed. And then in comparison to Uganda, Kenya does not recognize QDS as a category or class of seed, but there is a seed class called standard, and there's a lot of discussion going on at the moment about what should be the thresholds for standard seed and which crops should be allowed into that class. There are also many other questions that this whole study and these processes raise about who is allowed, who has the capacity to produce seed potato. And as I said, that there is this kind of devolution and decentralized process to the county level. And so overall, we're looking at a complex set of factors, social factors and technical factors, and there's always going to be some trade-offs that we need to navigate around. So thank you, and back to you, Maha.
Okay, thank you very much, Margaret, for this excellent case study. I think we have 3 excellent case studies here. And I see in the chat that all these case studies already raise a lot of questions about the details, like how did you do this? How did you do that? What is the difference between certified, quality assured? So I encourage also the presenters to look at the chat. But right now in the panel discussion, I would like to pull it a little bit to a higher level about talking about sensible regulation and what it all implies. So I would like to go first to Mainza. Mainza, can you please unmute yourself? I know that there was some connectivity issue, but how do you see the role of regulation in seed sector development, or what should be the role of regulation in seed sector development? Please share your idea with us, please.
Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you for the invitation to join the panel, and thank you to my fellow panelists who have been very comprehensive, even though they were given a short time to speak. I'll point to one broad, higher level role of regulation, which is to formalize the seed sector. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the classes of certified seed, basic seed, or pre-basic seed, but it also applies to formalizing QDS when it comes to that, and even standard seed when it comes to that. And we can put vegetatively propagated crops in there as well. This is really important because regulations are essentially implementing instruments of a law. So the law just provides a legal framework, regulations provide the structure, the operational modalities, and so on and so forth. And to touch on what a few of the panelists mentioned, the issue of structure, who does what and how do they do it? Can anyone just qualify to be a seed company or to be a local seed business or to be a producer of seed potato? The answer is definitely no. We have to have very clear roles and quality criteria for each one and what they play. In the specific context here, what we're talking about on quality control and quality assurance, we need to clearly lay out the do's and the don'ts. What are we going to allow? What are we not going to allow? And what are the penalties for defaulting on those do's and don'ts? All of that detail comes out in regulations, and it goes a lot further than that to even talk about the standards and going into numbers and so on and so forth. And you can put numbers to even show the distinctions between certified seed and QDS. I saw a question like that in the chat. So in general, I just say our sessions are intended to formalize the sector by providing structure and the operational modalities, and that applies to all the classes of seed, certified to QDS and standard seed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mainza. So let me now go to for also, yeah, so regulation to formalize the seed sector, who should do what, and getting a penalty if you don't do it as you should do it. Let me now go to Lava. I have a question for you. And yeah, if you talk about formalizing the seed sector and structuring the seed sector and about regulations, so who is actually benefiting from these regulations, or who is benefiting for a more strict seed regulation? So who gains and loses by regulation of the seed sector? Could you share your ideas with us, please?
Okay, thank you. I think the very purpose of seed regulations is to promote seed industry, to monitor seed industry, and also to encourage entry of seed entrepreneurs into the seed industry. Basically, it is all customer oriented in principle, because seed regulation is there to help promote business. But what we need to see is what type of entrepreneurs are in operation. The established regulations favor what we call as a conventional business entrepreneurs. That means who come and then formally register as an entity. Okay, this disadvantages a lot of traditional seed producers because registering as an entity is a very expensive process. So without going into further details on the requirements, the existing framework basically disadvantages community seed producers. For some crops, for instance, maize hybrid seed production, this may not be an issue because there is no hybrid seed production coming from communities. So that way there is no disadvantage there. But if you look at open pollinated crops and VPCs, this is mainly coming from the regular and traditional entrepreneurs. In some countries, the law also prohibits sale of any type of seed, which is legally punishable. So they can, the regulators have a right to arrest and put them in jail or put heavy penalty. So as such, such frameworks actually disadvantage those who are actually contributing to the system, okay, which is feeding to the food production. So what actually happens, since many regulators don't implement stringent rules so that they don't end up in an issue where you are putting everybody in jail instead of help contributing to develop a solution, right? So what now many countries are realizing is that the need for flexibility. There is a need to allow the industry to grow, but by keeping the regulatory system as is, but by providing concessions. Okay, it's what we call policy concessions. You're not tampering with the existing framework, but offering concessions that would allow the emerging players to evolve through the system and then become a professional player. So that way the system would become a friend of the seed producer who then can feed the food production industry. So this is how I see, and this is how we are working with the stakeholders, and this is what we are telling them to do. Okay, we need to have the existing framework as a higher level goal, but then use a stepwise approach to accomplish.
Okay, thank you very much, Lava. So seed regulations to regulate the seed industry, but as a friend to seed producers to promote the seed industry. I would like to move to David now. So in that context, so how do you balance over-regulation versus under-regulation?
How do you balance it? That's a very good question. I think, you know, referring back to what Margaret was talking a bit about, regulation is part of a negotiated process, if you will. It's like all policies, there are different interested parties. There are winners and losers in regulation. And you know, the outcomes that we arrive at in the regulatory space are negotiated, often on the basis of relative power. Those are just the realities of all policy making processes. So how do you strike that balance? I think it really comes down to, well, you know, how well organized are the parties, and how strong is the evidence on which you know, these policies are being formulated and implemented. And that's probably what worries me the most. I've worked in many countries, in many situations, where this idea that, you know, we must formalize the informal has been the main operating modality of government and many stakeholders, including development partners and donors. And in doing so, you know, they make illegal, you know, the trade in seeds among you know, neighboring farmers, all in the name of sort of, you know, compliance with international standards or their vision of you know, a formalized economy. And you know, that's one extreme. The other extreme is, you know, this idea that, you know, everything should be informal, and you know, regulation just gets in the way, and farmers will select the best seeds amongst each other and share openly, which we also know is not true in many situations. So striking that balance is a negotiated process, and all we can hope for is that some of us, analysts, researchers like myself and many others, actually bring some evidence to the table on the costs of regulation and the benefits of regulation, and regulatory delays and other such elements that go into sort of the if you will, the cost benefit analysis or the cost effectiveness analysis, or the impact analysis of regulation. And that's really what it comes down to. Really focusing in on you know, putting evidence behind what we're talking about here. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, David, for again highlighting negotiation as a power game, which also came out in the presentation of Margaret indeed, and emphasizing the need for evidence-based regulation. I would like to now move to Jeffrey for a question, and it's also something related to his last slide. So which was about QDS and implementation of regulation. So how do you deal with realities on the ground in implementation of regulation, also looking at capacities and resources available to implement regulation? And what about credibility? Can you say something about that, Jeffrey?
Thank you very much, Maya. A very critical question there, in which I share in with experience with Lava. It is very easy to come up with the regulations to address a particular seed sector challenges. However, a very big challenge also comes down, one, in presenting feasibility of implementation. Looking at that these regulations requires enormous resources, it requires enormous infrastructure. Like if you look at the QDS regulation, yes, the law is in place, but the QDS regulation emphasizes decentralization of inspection. And inspection, much as we have the district local government structures are in place, it requires that the teams, the technical people, the district agricultural officers need to be trained. They need to be equipped to be able to do the rightful services. And this requires resources. And also, to complete the certification, you need a decentralized seed testing capacities. That requires regional seed testing labs, which is can support the field quality assurance system to have a complete support of the regulations. So all these things requires a concerted effort between the public sector, the donor community, since some of these crops for which the regulations are designed for, they are basically supporting food security systems. They're supporting access to quality seed to support farmers who do not have access to some of this seed. And therefore, it requires an initial capital investment that calls for a joint effort to institute all these infrastructures to support the regulations to be sensible. So that's the experience that we have in Uganda. And of course, building it with the public sector through the district local government here, it builds in the credibility, because the public servants are taken to be the most high-ranking official who can really follow procedures, and also aligning it with the Ministry of Agriculture brings it the credibility of enforcing the regulation. And of course, the seed users benefit at the end of it all, because it's about ensuring that the seed users get the rightful product at the right time and at the right quality. And then for the seed entrepreneurs,
Jeffrey?
they can lose if they don't follow the procedures. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeffrey. This is very valuable, and thank you for sharing your experience in Uganda also on this topic, and again highlighting also the need for light touch systems that cost less capital and less capacity need, etc. So I would like to go to the final question that I have, and I would like to ask Margaret to answer that question. So yeah, regulations affect seed sector stakeholders in different ways, and we have seen different stakeholders have different interests. But how can you really change the game of making regulations? Like David said, there are always winners and losers. So what is your advice? How can you change the game of regulation making? Could you please reflect on that?
Okay, I know time is tight, so I think, as many people recognize, we can't continue that the majority of seed flows are considered to be illegal. So there has to be some way to recognize the informal sector so that there can be more investment in working with stakeholders in the informal sector, because we know that they are all, the formal sector and the informal sector are interlinked. The second thing which came out of the work in Kenya, and David touched on as well, we have to recognize that there is a political economy around regulations, and who is there and who is not there. And if we want more equitable outcomes, we need to be clear about who is part of those processes, who is represented, and build capacity in that area. I think the third thing that will be a game changer is the ICT platforms that are out there, and the new novel technologies that are coming on board as well, because they will reduce the cost of some of these regulatory processes, and therefore make sure that farmers have access to quality seed at appropriate prices. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Margaret, for bringing these conclusions to this discussion, and for highlighting what I find very important also, that informal seed supply should not be illegal, realizing that there is a political economy, different stakeholders have different interests, as well as highlighting the potential of new technologies. I think we have to leave it like this. I'm very happy with this excellent panel with a lot of expertise on this topic. And I would like you as panelists to stay on a little bit longer and have a look at the questions in the chat, because some of them are really very specifically on your case study, and we would like to do justice also to participants who put these questions forward. So if you can spend a few more minutes and put some answers in the chat to some of the questions, that would really be great. And yeah, time is up, unfortunately. So thank you very much, panelists. Thank you, participants, for joining us. And over to you, James.
Thanks, Maria. And yeah, I agree. Thanks to everybody. Really rich, perhaps too many rich perspectives and too many good cases to put into a 50-minute discussion. So we're already thinking to the future for a next event. Indeed, great panelists. If you can give some attention to the chat. What I will say is also Jeffrey and others, please make sure when you're answering questions from the chat, you're sending those answers to all panelists and attendees, and not just to me and not just to each other. Thanks for that. Okay, so where are we? We are now at, I suppose, a bittersweet moment. We've, over the last 2.5 days, we've had some really high quality discussions. I think it's been fair to say that, at least from our side, we've been delighted with the turnout, the contributions, the different stories that have come to the fore, the different debates, the different questions that have been going backwards and forwards. But all good things have to come to an end, and that's what we're going to do next. We're going to take a short 10-minute break. I also advise you to go freshen up. We're going to come back for a very concise look into some real game changers for seed sector transformation that have really come to the front over the last 2.5 days. Now, to do that, we have quite a large panel, and they're under real pressure to zoom in on these real critical game changers. And following that session, we will have a very brief close. You will have seen in the chat that I am recommending everybody to sign up for the inaugural General Assembly of the African Seed and Biotechnology Partnership Platform. Please take a look there at that link. It's a separate session, a separate online space than where you are now. So you will need to register and get a different join link. In any case, thank you all for being for this session, and we'll see you back here in just under 10 minutes.